Apollo 11 moon landing. You're sitting in front of a TV that still has rabbit ear antennas, watching a man in a bulky white suit step onto a place that isn't Earth. His voice crackles through the speakers, and suddenly, the room feels quiet. Across the globe, 600 million people are all holding their breath at the same time. The Apollo 11 moon landing was the day humanity hit the pause button on everything to watch one man take a step into history. The US had been in a space race with the Soviet Union for years, each side trying to prove they had the brains, the tech, and the guts to go further. On that day, America pulled ahead. Neil Armstrong was the first to step out, with Buzz Aldrin behind him. Michael Collins stayed in orbit, basically the guy who drove and waited in the car. But even if you weren't American, this moment didn't belong to one country. It was for everyone. Atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. At 8:15 a.m., the sky above Hiroshima looked calm. People were walking to work, and there were children who headed to school. And then, in a single flash, everything changed. A U.S. bomber dropped the first atomic bomb ever used in war, a weapon called Little Boy, and the entire city was swallowed by light, fire, and silence. It exploded and it erased a lot of things. Buildings collapsed instantly. Shadows were burned into walls. Tens of thousands of people died within seconds, and thousands more died slowly from burns, radiation, and injuries that doctors didn't even know how to treat. 3 days later, before the world could even understand what had happened, another bomb, called the Fat Man, was dropped on Nagasaki. The second city turned to rubble just like the first. But by the end of it, estimates say up to 226,000 people died, most of them civilians. The goal was to force Japan to surrender and end World War II. And it worked. Japan surrendered on August 15th. But what started as a decision in a military meeting room ended with human bodies turned to ash. Survivors, known as hibakusha, lived with the physical and emotional scars for the rest of their lives. Footage of the destruction was kept hidden at first, but once it surfaced, people realized this wasn't just a weapon, it was a warning. Victory in Europe Day. After 6 years of war on May 8, 1945, that day started quietly in a way that felt unfamiliar. There were no sirens, no smoke, no distant echoes of gunfire, just radios switching on and voices saying the same thing across every border. Germany had surrendered. In London, the crowd started building before noon. People packed the streets shoulder to shoulder, waving flags and grabbing anyone nearby to celebrate. Churchill gave a short speech from a balcony, saying that they won over fascism. Paris lit up in red, white, and blue. New York rained ticker tape from office windows. Across the world, people were finally allowed to stop holding their breath. The war in Europe was over. Hitler was dead, taking his own life, and Berlin had fallen. And for one night, even the most broken cities remembered how to celebrate. Even so, May 8th gave people something they hadn't felt in years, a future. And in countries like France, the UK, and the Czech Republic, it's still marked as a national holiday. John Lennon is assassinated. It was just past 10:50 p.m. in New York when the music stopped. John Lennon had just returned home to the Dakota, an apartment building near Central Park. He stepped out of his car, turned toward the front door, and then a man called his name. The man was Mark David Chapman. He had asked Lennon for an autograph earlier that day. Now he pulled out a revolver and shot him 5 times. 4 of the bullets hit. Lennon collapsed on the sidewalk. Minutes later, he was pronounced dead at the hospital. News broke during Monday Night Football. For millions watching, it didn't feel real. This was the man who helped shape modern music, a voice for peace, love, protest, and change. And now he was gone. Not in a war, not from old age, but from an angry fan with a gun. People flooded into Central Park overnight, lighting candles and playing his records out loud. The assassination of John F. Kennedy. It was just after noon in Dallas. The weather was clear, the motorcade was moving slow, and President Kennedy was smiling, waving to the crowd from the back of a convertible. His wife Jackie sat beside him in a pink suit. Then, 3 shots cracked through the noise. 1 hit his neck, 1 hit his head. The car sped off as people screamed and ducked. A few minutes later, the president was dead. The footage wasn't broadcast live, but the aftermath unfolded on TV in real time. News anchors dropped their scripts. Reporters cried on air. For many Americans, it was the first time they saw breaking news happen before anyone knew what to say. Lee Harvey Oswald was arrested the same day, but he never stood trial. 2 days later, he was shot on live television by a nightclub owner named Jack Jack Ruby. Just another death in a story that never got a clean ending. The questions came fast and never really stopped. Who planned it? Was it really just Oswald? Was there more to it? The Zapruder film, a home video that captured the moment frame by frame, became one of the most picked-apart pieces of footage in history. Chernobyl disaster. At 1:23 a.m., Reactor 4 at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant exploded. It wasn't a small fire or a technical glitch, it was a full core rupture, the kind of failure that was never supposed to happen. The blast launched a concrete lid the weight of a tank into the air. Flames lit up the night sky, and radioactive material began leaking into the atmosphere while plant workers stood nearby, some of them unaware they'd already been exposed to a fatal dose. In the hours that followed, fire crews arrived without proper gear. They climbed onto the roof, hosed down flaming graphite, and went home coughing up blood. Most of them died within weeks. Officials in Moscow stayed quiet. It wasn't until radiation detectors went off in Sweden, 800 miles away, that the world realized something was wrong. By then, the damage was already spreading. Towns near the plant were evacuated days too late. Residents left, thinking they'd be gone for 3 days. They never returned. The nearby city of Pripyat is still empty. Apartments frozen in time, toys left on floors, calendars stuck on April. The death of Queen Elizabeth II. For most people alive, Queen Elizabeth had always just been there, printed on coins, giving speeches on Christmas, shaking hands with prime ministers who came and went like background noise. When the news finally came, it was quiet. A flag lowered, a single line from Buckingham Palace. There was just a simple message that the Queen had died peacefully at Balmoral, and that an era was over. She had ruled for 70 years, through 15 prime ministers, a Cold War, a pandemic, and more public scandals than the tabloids could keep track of. She met with everyone from Churchill to Trump, guiding the monarchy through divorce, protests, terror attacks, and survived and experienced the digital age. In the days that followed, people stood in 12-hour lines just to walk past her coffin. Entire train stations fell silent. The UK triggered Operation London Bridge, a detailed playbook that had been ready for decades, down to the minute. Fukushima nuclear accident. On an ordinary afternoon, the ground started shaking just off the northeast coast of Japan. It didn't stop quickly, rather the shaking dragged on for nearly 6 minutes, and it cracked roads, knocked buildings loose, and cut power across entire cities. The quake measured 9.0, the strongest ever recorded in Japan. Then came the tsunami. A wall of seawater hit the coastline with almost no warning. It tore through towns like they were made of cardboard. Cars floated down streets, and boats crashed into buildings. Entire neighborhoods were gone in minutes. In some places, the wave was taller than the rooftops. Over 18,000 people were killed. Thousands of others were never found. And then, Fukushima. The tsunami flooded the nuclear power plant's backup generators. Cooling systems failed. Pressure built. Over the next 3 days, 3 reactors melted down. Explosions ripped through the plant. Radiation leaked into the air and ocean. Entire towns were evacuated overnight. Some still haven't been reopened. It exposed dozens. Evacuation zones were too small, and the warnings were too slow. Officials downplayed the danger, and the cleanup is still happening more than a decade later. The Israel-Hamas War. The conflict between Israelis and Palestinians has lasted over 75 years. Through wars, uprisings, peace talks, failed deals, and generations who've only ever known life under occupation or siege. But on October 7, 2023, that long war cracked open again in a way no one expected. At dawn, Hamas militants crossed into Israel by land, air, and sea. They even hit army bases, burned homes, and opened fire at a music festival. Civilians were killed in their beds. Families were dragged into Gaza. The attack left over 1,200 Israelis dead and more than 200 hostages taken. This was the deadliest day in Israel's history. Israel responded with airstrikes almost immediately. Within hours, Gaza's skyline was on fire. Roads were torn apart. Hospitals flooded with casualties. Over the next 6 days, Israel dropped more than 6,000 bombs. Then came the ground invasion. By the end of the year, the death toll in Gaza had passed 20,000. Most were civilians. Over 8,000 were children. Entire neighborhoods were reduced to dust. Food, water, fuel, gone. Aid convoys were blocked. The power stayed out. The death of Michael Jackson. By the afternoon of June 25, 2009, TMZ had broken the news. Michael Jackson had gone into cardiac arrest at his home in Los Angeles. Minutes later, it spread everywhere. Phones lit up, networks cut into programming, and by the time the hospital confirmed it, most of the world already knew. The king of pop was dead. He was 50 years old, rehearsing for a comeback tour, supposed to be in London in a few weeks. Instead, he collapsed in his bedroom after being given a powerful dose of propofol, a drug meant for surgery, not sleep. His personal doctor, Conrad Murray, waited too long to call for help. The emergency call came in too late. The official cause of death was acute propofol intoxication, but the fallout went deeper. Murray was later convicted of involuntary manslaughter. Fans blamed the music industry, the media, his team, basically anyone they felt had pushed him too hard for too long. Jackson was more than a pop star. He was a global icon. His career started at age 5. By 30, he had shattered music records, sold out stadiums, and changed the sound of pop forever. But in his final years, controversy followed him everywhere. Courtrooms, health rumors, plastic surgeries, and reclusive behavior made headlines more often than his music. The death of Princess Diana. It was just after midnight in Paris when the black Mercedes carrying Princess Diana crashed inside the Pont de l'Alma tunnel. The driver lost control at high speed while trying to outrun paparazzi. The car slammed into a pillar. The back seat was crushed. Diana wasn't killed instantly. She was still alive when first responders pulled her from the wreckage, but her injuries were massive. A torn pulmonary vein, internal bleeding. She died a few hours later at the hospital. Her partner, Dodi Fayed, and the driver, Henry Paul, were both pronounced dead at the scene. Only the bodyguard survived. Within hours, the news hit every front page. TV anchors looked stunned reading the words. Crowds began gathering outside Buckingham Palace, placing flowers, notes, and photos against the gates. That wall of grief grew into a sea of tributes that lasted for days. The British press, already criticized for its obsession with Diana, came under fire again. The chase, the flashbulbs, the fact that photographers snapped pictures of her dying instead of helping. Investigations later revealed the driver had alcohol and prescription drugs in his system, but the conversation never really left the role of the media. Her funeral drew millions into the streets.